Stretching is part of most athletes' routines as it helps to reduce the chance of injury and maintain the desired range of movement at our joints. It is, however, debated as to how often you should do it and exactly what type. Well, dynamic and static stretches both have their place, but they need to be used in certain scenarios to make sure you get the benefit of them. So today I'm going to take a look at the difference between the two and when you should use a dynamic or a static stretch. Why stretch in the first place? Well, it can help improve flexibility and range of movement at your joints. Although you might be asking, why is that important? Well, that's when it depends on what your goals are and why you might be wanting to improve your flexibility. I did mention that it can help prevent injuries as it can allow you to do certain movements with less restriction. If you're trying to hold a certain position for a long period of time, then if you've got a nice muscle balance, you're going to find that much easier. And it can also help to relieve any tension in muscles when it comes to your general posture. On the flip side, however, you might want certain areas of your body to actually still have a certain amount of tension. Take runners, for example. They actually need a fair amount of stiffness to help with the energy return, especially when it comes to sprinting. Well, let's have a look at us as triathletes. We want to have nice flexible shoulders for swimming. You need to have a decent range of movement at your hips and your lower back and hamstrings to allow you to get into that time trial position on the bike. And then when it comes to the run, you want to have enough mobility at the front of your hips so that your stride length isn't going to be limited. However, we don't need to be so flexible that we can do the splits or fold in two, because if that was the situation, we'd probably end up having stability issues, which could then lead to injuries from that side of things. So you need to work out what areas of your body need to be more flexible and then focus on working there. Let me quickly explain the difference between the two types of stretching. A static stretch is when you take the muscle and the tendon to its end point, so fully lengthened, and you hold it there for a set period of time, normally something between 15 and 60 seconds. A dynamic stretch, however, is still taking the muscles and the tendons to that end point, but you don't hold it there, so you're moving through the full range of movement for the joint from one end to the other. Well, there is so much evidence for either type and when to use which sort of stretching. Static stretching was thought of as very much the old school style. You might remember from movies or maybe your own PE classes where before doing any exercise you had to do some form of static stretch, something like touching your toes before going for a run. Well, the thought of that, doing it on cold muscles now, really does make me shudder. Although that said, yoga is a form of static stretching, but if you're following a routine, it should hopefully actually take you through a flow, get your muscles nice and warm and supple before you actually have to hold a really tough pose when your muscles are ready for it. Static stretching still has its place, but it does depend on what muscles you want to stretch and what state your body is in beforehand. Say you're sat at your desk, for example, and you need to move and stretch. Well, that's probably going to be a static stretch, and it's a great way to relieve any postural tightness, give your muscles, those short and tighter muscles, a little bit of a stretch. And I don't think I'm alone saying that I've done that good morning stretch, a little bit wider than that, many times at my desk. I'm sure you guys have too. But when it comes to actually using a static stretch in sport, most athletes will use it at the end of their session because you want to have your muscles fully warmed up. So it's a great way to actually incorporate it into your cool down, especially after tough sessions. And I must admit, I do try to incorporate a routine of at least going through stretching my calves, my hamstrings, hip flexors and back after a decent run or a bike ride. Although I'm a little bit guilty of cutting it short, especially in the winter when I get back and I'm really cold and just want to jump in the shower. But another perfect combination to this sort of warm down form of stretching is adding in some foam roller exercises to your routine. Dynamic stretching has definitely become the more popular type of stretching over the years, and that's for a couple of reasons. So it's going to help to increase the blood flow to your muscles that are about to work. It can also help with the fluidity of the synovial fluid in some of your joints. So basically, it's going to reduce that feeling of restriction when it comes to your range of movement. And there are two different ways in which you can do dynamic stretching, either very controlled methods or using momentum to actually take your joints to that end range. So the controlled method would be something like you might see footballers doing, that hip opener exercise where they're walking forwards, they're lifting their knee up to 90 degrees and then take out in front of them and then taking it out to the side. So you're really opening up the front of the hip and placing it back down and doing it with the next leg. So that's a very much controlled motion. The same would be a walking lunge. When you control the motion forwards, you lower yourself into that lunge, you take your weight onto the next leg and move it through that way. It's a very controlled style of stretching. Then there's the less controlled dynamic stretching, when you use momentum to actually help your joints get to the end range of motion at both ends of that movement. If we take a closer look at leg swings, for example, the form when you're going forwards and backwards. When you bring your leg forwards in front of you, then you're going to be stretching those hip extensors at the back of your leg, but you're going to be using the muscles at the front of your leg to actually get you in that position. And then as you swing back in the opposite direction, you're going to be using your hip extensors to take you back, but you should feel the stretch at the front of your hips. So it's very important that you use the muscle to actually get you in that position, but you're relaxing the opposite one and vice versa. So it does take a little bit of concentration to start with, but once you get into that rhythm and you really learn to relax, you'll start to feel that your range of motion can actually increase quite quickly. I'm going to be honest here, finding evidence to support whether you should stretch and what type of stretching to do is rather difficult, as there's so much contrasting information out there. There's even some studies that just prove actually becoming more flexible is just being able to tolerate holding that end range position for longer and not even affecting the muscle length at all. So whether stretching is scientifically good or not, it's still open. But I would say, I personally feel that stretching can play an important part in our lives as everyday life, but also as triathletes. So I thought I would share you some of my routines that I go through for different scenarios. I tend to use the foam roller and static stretching when I'm sat at my desk for hours on end, because I find if I'm in that set position that I really need to actually open up my thoracic spine, because that gets really stiff. So that's a great way to help in that scenario. When it comes to running, I definitely, before a key session, incorporate some dynamic leg swings, as it just helps really get the blood flowing and open up my hips nicely. I'll do that before I do any strides. I'll also incorporate walking lunges, often with a thoracic twist, so I just make sure that my whole body doesn't really have any resistance. When it comes to swimming, especially open water, cold water swimming, I'll do quite a lot of dynamic arm swings. If anything more, just to get my heart rate up and get me warm so that I'm not going to find such a shock when I get into that cold water. Post running, I do try to at least stretch out my calves, especially if it's been a hard run session, as they are the area that would complain the most the next day. And also partly because it's probably the laziest stretch, because you can use gravity to help you. So I do it off the edge of a step and I just hold that position for a little while. And if I am being really good, then I will manage to foam roll out my calves, my hamstrings, quads, and basically legs, hips and lower back. I find that really helps. When it comes to cycling though, I'm definitely lazier, and I think that's partly because I'm normally cold when I get back or really hungry. So it does tend to go by the wayside slightly, so that's where I definitely rely on yoga, and I try to do a minimum of 1 or 2 yoga sessions a week. I must admit, it's slightly embarrassing compared to the others in my class as to how inflexible I am when it comes to especially the hip area, but I'm not getting any worse, at least, so it's got to be doing something, and it helps to keep me on track when it comes to my training. If this video has done anything, it's certainly made me realise that I need to work on my mobility and general stretching routine a little bit more, so I'm feeling slightly inspired. If you are, but you want a bit more guidance, we've got plenty of videos to help you. We've got a running mobility workout, we've got some static stretches, we have a post-cycling routine video, as well as various other warm-up videos, so do go and check those out, and hopefully you are feeling inspired to get ready and go and do some movement, even if it is from the comfort of your own sofa. But before you go, just make sure you give us a like and a follow on our social media channels.